How did you first come up with the idea of creating dual financial statements?
Actually, we didn't do dual financial statements. It was more about accelerating revenue that we tried to do. And this was done by increasing revenue through cooperation with third parties. For example, let's say there's a tech company that sells mobile credit. Selling mobile credit to individual consumers is usually small. They approached a large mobile credit agent, for instance. Then they told the agent to do transactions through our platform. The agent would get a margin and a promotion from it. Finally, the transactions went through the platform, and the GMV gross merchandise value became large. That's what eFishery did in the beginning, actually.
In your last interview with Bloomberg, the public response on social media was quite heated, especially when you mentioned many startup founders doing similar things.
And that's also what I actually said on Bloomberg. The context was that in the beginning, I heard stories from several founders who specifically did that to inflate GMV. That's why it became the justification at the beginning. Oh, these people I talked to are doing it too, so I'll think about how I can do this eFishery version by cooperating with fish agents, feed agents, for them to transact through eFishery, through the eFishery system. We took their transactions as if they were our transactions. That's what was not organic. So that was actually the context. I'm not accusing all startups of manipulating financial statements or anything. The context in Bloomberg was that at that time in the beginning, I talked to several founders, and they were doing strategies to increase their GMV in non-organic ways. That's what eFishery did.
Were those founders in your circle?
Yes, there were several founders in Indonesia. As to whether this is common for many companies in Indonesia, I can't say. I don't have enough data. But there are some founders whose stories I heard, and they were doing it too.
So at that time, eFishery was chasing a fundraising target?
Exactly. So in 2018, we were in Series A funding. We talked to a lot of investors, and they all refused to invest in eFishery. Until finally, we only had 2 months of runway left. And when our runway was 2 months left, we kept looking for investment. Fortunately, at that time, there was a bridge loan given by an existing investor. Finally, our runway increased, but with the condition that if this investment wasn't secured, it would become debt instead. So it was during those 6 months, from the time we got the bridge loan from investors, that we did the non-organic revenue increase. That's what we did in the beginning, which eventually led to getting funding from Wavemaker. I talked to some founders who I mentioned earlier. Oh yes, they were doing it, as I said, there were platforms, there were large B2B companies. Their platforms were actually B2C, for example. So they collaborated with B2B to get large transactions through their platform. So there were several companies that I can't mention. But in my experience, only a few companies I know did that. I'm not saying all of them did it. That's why what I said on Bloomberg was actually more about me wanting to share that sometimes when we do something, we ourselves doubt whether it's right or wrong. So our morality isn't just right or wrong, but justifying, others are doing it too, so I'll do it. So there are 3, right, wrong, and everyone else is doing it. So actually the context I wanted to convey in Bloomberg, yes, for founders as a lesson, if they are faced with the same thing again, they need to reevaluate their decisions.
What were the considerations besides other founders doing it? Did eFishery really have to survive with that Series A fundraising, or did you have a calculation that if you boosted GMV, you might reach that figure in 2 years?
Exactly. The first thing was for eFishery to be able to continue to exist, because at that time we already had farmers who were impacted by eFishery. At that time, we also had employees who depended on us. So I wanted to ensure that eFishery could continue. And if eFishery continued, there would be an opportunity for us to make a greater impact. That was the basic reason. Besides that, eFishery's business model is a traditional one. We sell tools, there's a margin, we sell feed, there's a margin, we sell fish, there's a margin, and so on. So it's a traditional business model. And we don't need a lot of ads and so on. We don't put ads on TV. We don't put ads on billboards. So in terms of cost, it's very efficient. So at that time, if we could get it, I was confident that we could ensure this would be sustainable.
How many years did you calculate it would take for the numbers to reach the inflated GMV?
2 years should be enough, because we thought that if we had already fundraised, the funds would be enough to self-sustain, and we wouldn't need funding again afterward.
So for those 2 years, you didn't want to fundraise again, but suddenly someone offered?
Yes. So actually, sometimes the process makes us see unique opportunities. Qualitatively, this opportunity felt too good to pass up, even though the business, if we had decided to remain sustainable at that time, could still run. For example, during Series B and Series C and afterward, those became attractive opportunities because there were indeed investors interested in investing in us, especially in Series C, with big names like Temasek and SoftBank showing interest. Did we actually need it? Not really, but because we saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I thought that if we had greater resources, there would be many things we could do to create impact. For example, creating new products, increasing the company's size so that we could do more for the farmers.
But was there any pressure from existing investors to fundraise after Series A?
Yes, there was, one of them. Because for venture capital, in terms of business model, they indeed need companies to grow quickly. And the way to grow quickly is to justify the valuation with fundraising so that growth can be significant in a short time and the returns can also be higher. So if we are seen as a company with the potential to have a large valuation, then the push to continuously fundraise is also greater compared to companies whose business performance is not too strong.
But in the period from Series A to Series B, did existing investors know that eFishery's GMV was suspicious? Did any of them know in the later stages?
Well, I certainly can't state whether they knew or not. That really needs to be asked directly to them. But what's certain is that they supported the fundraising process for us.
But why was eFishery's business model ultimately deemed unsustainable and eventually shut down? Was it a lack of scalability, or did it actually need more capital injection?
From my perspective, the decision to close eFishery was not because of whether eFishery's fundamentals existed or not. Because from the investor's point of view, they invested at a certain valuation. For example, at that time, they entered at a valuation of $1.4 billion or around Rp 20 trillion. Now, if the valuation is Rp 20 trillion and eFishery's business continues to run even if its fundamentals are good, but it turns out that its fundamentals only justify a valuation of Rp 3 trillion, then for them, that's a problem. It's not about whether the business exists or not, but whether the fundamentals can justify such a large valuation. Investors come in with the expectation that the valuation will go up from Rp 20 trillion to, let's say, Rp 50 trillion. Now the question is, if this business continues, can its fundamentals increase to a valuation of Rp 50 trillion or not? What's interesting is that when I stepped down, our cash and current assets were actually still quite large. We still had Rp 1.2 trillion in cash. Current assets in various forms, assets, receivables, and so on, amounted to around Rp 1.4 trillion, so the total was still around Rp 3 trillion. But, for example, if the valuation is only Rp 3 trillion, plus its reputation in the public is already damaged, then of course that becomes a heavy consideration. So it's like the money left is only 1/3 of the total investment, because the total investment that came in was around Rp 5 trillion. Meanwhile, the valuation dropped, for example, to 1/5 or even 1/10 for investors. It's better to just withdraw the money, because investors don't just invest in businesses with good fundamentals, but in businesses where if they exit, the valuation can be much higher. So that's what I imagine, and I think that's a logical decision. That's why when the closure of eFishery happened, and many comments on social media said, oh, this business doesn't exist, that's why it was closed. That's not entirely true. It's not because the business didn't exist, but because the valuation couldn't justify the continuation of the business with a high valuation target. While the money is still there, it's better to just withdraw it, because this is not a fundamental game, but a valuation game for investors.
What was your target for how long it would take for eFishery's financial statements to truly align between what you reported to investors and the internal reports for the team?
The target was 3 years.
So in 2027?
Exactly, in 2027. From our side, growth is managed, including investor expectations versus actual internal growth, from programs like exports to the U.S., increasing value added downstream by selling frozen fish and private label for feed. So we really want everything to be in line by the time of the IPO.
Those 3 years are in line with the IPO plan?
IPO plan, exactly.
How much do you want to fundraise? Have IPO preparations started?
Not yet. Not yet. It's just a target, our IPO target. And that's adjusted to our internal readiness.
Why are you optimistic? Has eFishery hired a consultant to calculate that, or has your team used its own projections?
First, we have indeed used projections that we tried to build ourselves. Which ones are conservative, which ones are somewhat optimistic but still executable, and which ones are stretch targets. But we also look at comparisons. For example, if we IPO with other peer companies like Goto and some that have already IPO'd, when they went public, their financial condition wasn't the best. I mean, we can still compare. So from there we see, oh, if other tech companies can IPO in much worse conditions, and we still have 3 years to build a more sustainable and cash flow positive business, then that's it. That could actually be in a much better condition compared to peer tech companies. We also compare ourselves with the scale of other similar companies in the fisheries sector, or, for example, poultry like CPIN and JPFA, what our current scale is, and what position we can reach if all our targets are met. That's what we're pursuing.
But then there was a whistleblower. What do you suspect triggered it?
I don't know. I have no suspicions at all.
How was the communication with investors?
Well, certainly with investors, it's already not going well, because the last time I contacted investors, there was no response anymore. And, well, that's probably for a reasonable reason. I mean, from the investor's point of view, I understand why they also didn't open communication. I WhatsApped or sent emails, but they didn't respond.
What was the content of the email you sent?
Mostly, I apologized.
So you admitted your mistake?
Yes, regardless of admitting or not, I apologized. Because whatever happened at eFishery would definitely affect them in terms of reputation, in terms of anything. It would affect their ecosystem. So I apologize if anything done at eFishery, personally, I had made a mistake. And that's what eventually had a negative impact on them. So it's more about goodwill, that whatever happened, there must be a mistake from my side. For my mistakes, I apologize.
After the investigation by FTI, how was it? Did you make any efforts to communicate with employees, assuring them that they wouldn't be greatly affected, or that the impact wouldn't be as significant as it is now?
At that time, actually, on the day I was suspended, I was asked to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. The investors conveyed that this NDA was necessary because they wanted to resolve this quietly, because if it got bigger and blew up, it would have a negative impact. And at the same time, I was also asked to inform all leadership that the company would transition from being led by the founder to professional management. I saw that such things are indeed done a lot in other companies. The founder has stepped down, then it's taken over by professional management. That's why my perspective at that time was, oh, well, this is indeed going to be resolved. If there was an impact, it might be on me personally, having to step down and so on, but the company would still continue and this could work. That's why when the media coverage first came out, I was surprised, because why did it come out? But I was already bound by the NDA, and as much as possible, I wanted to comply with the entire process. So if I was asked not to speak publicly, then I wouldn't speak publicly. Even though as time went on, the narrative became more negative, but I thought there was something bigger I had to fight for. That was for the company to continue. I didn't want my speaking out to the public to worsen the situation, whether it was the chance for the company to continue becoming worse. Later, there would be an impact on the employees, an impact on the operations. That's why I finally decided that I didn't need to defend myself. That's it. I also communicated through several channels, and the goal was more to ensure that, as I knew, this company would continue. If you go to the new management, just follow what the new management says, and as much as possible, convey what our business opportunities are like. If what we built truly exists, the impact is big, the business can be generalized, and so on, and I entrusted that to the team so they could fight for the industry. That's what was done. That's why what eventually happened was completely beyond my imagination. And contrary to what the investors conveyed, it turned out that the operations were closed so quickly, and employees were laid off so massively and so quickly, that was unexpected.
So in the period from August to December, you had already conveyed the possibility of a transition and that the business would continue to your eFishery colleagues?
Oh no, I only conveyed that in December. So when the internal issue first arose, including before there were any documents until I was suspended, there was a 1-week gap. So I remember it was December 13th. On December 13th, I was asked to resign, suspended, something like that. Then I conveyed that to the leadership. From December to January, What I conveyed was just follow whatever the new management says. The important thing is that the company can continue and you can continue. That's why I tried to be as cooperative and compliant as possible with the entire process.
What was the atmosphere like when you gathered all the employees? Or was it just in a Zoom meeting?
With the leadership, it was everyone, exactly when I was suspended. Because when I was suspended, I was at the investor's office. Then all leaders were called there too. So when I was suspended, I immediately told all leaders, according to the investor's direction before the new one, that we would have a transition. That's why, because I was asked to convey that, I also had an idea that the company was indeed decided to be continued through new management with a new pattern, only I had to take down. From there, I prepared myself and also prepared the team.
So the investor's language was indeed about a transformation?
Exactly. At that time, I assumed, oh, well, there's a problem indeed. This problem would still be investigated, and I wanted to comply with the investigation process, but they wanted to resolve it internally, silently. And the company wanted to continue with a transition to new management. That's what I finally, complied with. That's why I didn't speak to the public either, because there was always that assumption, well, let it be. I mean, I thought, I'm the one being hammered in public, so let it be. Just swallow it. The important thing is that the company continues. The important thing is that the kids are still safe.
Did you ever think that your colleagues would resign when you were suspended, or even resign together?
Yes, there was actually a notion, well, if this is the case, let's all leave. But I was the one who held them back. Why? Don't. I mean, the important thing isn't whether Gibran is still in the company or not. The important thing is that the company's mission still continues. And that's important so that the new management also has enough resources to continue the company. So I was the one who persuaded them, it's okay, just follow the directions, don't do anything, don't be rash, don't do anything strange, just don't. Because for me, well, whatever the impact on me personally, I'm ready, including if I have to step down from the company or if my shares have to be withdrawn, well, that's it. I'm not thinking about that anymore. The important thing is that what we want to build continues.
After the audit results were leaked and many eFishery employees were affected because they were considered part of this fraud, did you ever talk to them directly?
Yes, that's right. I have spoken directly, although mostly in small forums that I conveyed. Because my internal communication channels had been closed since I was suspended, so email and so on were closed, I couldn't go to the office anymore. If I went to the office, I would be stopped. So I really couldn't communicate except with the teams that were still there. And to the team, I also said my apologies if this had an impact on them. And that's what still makes me very sad until now. Because as time goes on, more and more negative issues appear that I think are unfair to the employees. Because the majority of employees didn't know anything. I can say almost 100% of employees didn't know anything. They truly had high commitment and integrity. They had a strong work ethic. They built eFishery's business, which genuinely had an impact. But they were negatively affected by the negative public issues that emerged against eFishery, which eventually caused a lot of setbacks for them. Some, after their interview process was okay, were ghosted and not continued once it was known they were from eFishery. In fact, some employees also told me that their management said they could hire, but not at the head or manager level. Because if it was known that they hired people from eFishery, it could create issues with their shareholders. There were also companies that told them to just drop eFishery from their CD. Things like that are really unfortunate. And I feel sorry for them because they worked so hard during their time at eFishery. As I said, they were integrated, honest, truly worked wholeheartedly to build the mission at eFishery. But the personal impact on their careers ended up being beyond what it should have been.
In your opinion, why did the audit suddenly leak to the public? It was supposed to be very confidential, and you also trusted the management. You had already signed the NDA.
Well, I don't know. I mean, why and for what reason? But I personally was also shocked because throughout the entire investigation process, I tried to comply. And actually, from the investigation process, there were some things where I took the blame, so to speak, to ensure that the company could continue. But it turned out to be published. And the motivation behind publishing it, who wanted to publish it, I don't know at all. But as for the document, it should have been very confidential. And it was still interim, not yet final, only based on interviews, so there weren't many validated facts. And the investigation process was also short. I personally was only interviewed once during that investigation process, and the other team members were interviewed. But it was only a basic interview. There was no field visit, no checking with customers. So you could say this was incomplete, but it was presented, which ended up creating many negative perceptions. I mean, things that I personally supposedly did, when in fact I didn't, because I wanted to protect the company so that the company could continue. So to put it simply, that's it.
What do you mean by things you didn't do personally but admitted to?
Well, I can't really state it, but if you look at the FTI investigation, there are things that were all done by myself, all done under Gibran's orders. Those are the things that, well, I just accepted.
It also appeared in the audit that Anga Hardian, eFishery's VP of Corporate Finance and Investor Relation, played a role. Did taking the blame also include you stating that what he did was your order?
Exactly. That's one of them.
But what surprised you about Anga?
Actually, the most surprising thing was when I found out after the investigation process had begun, and he confirmed that there was a flow of funds to a personal account. I had no idea about that at all, and that was the biggest shock. Because as I said earlier, whatever I did at eFishery, I did it so that I could build an impactful company. So not a single penny that wasn't my right went into my personal account. I truly sacrificed other things there. But when he said there was a personal fund flow, I was like, wow, how could that be, even though I had trusted him so much?
You only found that out from the investigation results?
Exactly. I found out from the investigation results.
But did you know this person personally before recruiting him?
Oh, no. So I only got to know him professionally during the hiring process, during the interview. So I had no prior connection at all. So the hiring was professional based on his CV for that role.
After you found out, did you immediately contact Enga?
Yes, I definitely contacted him directly. And I confronted him, asking why this was done and so on. But at that point, the focus was really on ensuring that the issue wasn't directed as if it was my fault. Yes, because it really wasn't. So that's what I emphasized. That was the main focus.
Did you meet in person or?
Met in person in Bandung.
Why did you eventually agree to his suggestion to create nominee companies to boost GMV when you started having difficulty finding partners to transact on the eFishery platform?
Well, regarding that, first, the process was much more efficient and the risk was more manageable compared to having an external company. If we circulate money there, or there are transactions, if they have problems, the money could be lost and so on, the risk is big. And then, because this is probably based on trust. Yes, because of trust. I trusted him to run it. And I'm a biology graduate. My business has always been just fish ponds, so I actually don't really understand finance and so on. And when we hired people, we trusted that the people we hired had the same mission and had better expertise than us. And Anga, he's ex-Big Four, used to work at KPMG, and he really understands finance. So when he proposed that, I saw it as, okay, this is more efficient, the risk is more manageable, and I trusted that he had the competence to do it, so I let him.
But during that time, you didn't control it?
Exactly, because the tokens and everything else were entirely in his hands.
But from the FTI findings, were any of the Rp 26 billion from the nominee companies' accounts, besides personal interests, used as team bonuses?
That's unilateral, not me. So actually, in that fund flow, what was considered a bonus, meaning it was acknowledged as such, that this was a bonus from the company, even though I had no idea about it, there was no approval from the company. So if there's a fundraising bonus in the report, it's actually not a bonus, because we never gave it.
Your response to Patrick Walujo's managing partner North Star Group statement at the PEVC Summit 2025?
Nothing. Well, what is conveyed to the public is beyond my control. I deeply regret it because the impact is widespread. But there must be their own reasons why it was conveyed. What I feel is more like, oh dear, I feel sorry for the team, because it's as if everyone was involved, systematically. But how many people really knew? Who really knew about the financial pattern? Very few, maybe only 6 people.
After dealing with investors and the FTI consulting audit leaked to the public, did you offer jobs to former eFishery employees?
Personally, no. because what I helped with was more about recommending them to my colleagues, to my friends who own companies. Some own software houses, so I recommended them. These are good engineers. Other companies were also looking for management, so I gave recommendations. But because I personally don't do anything now, I can't absorb employment from the team.
What was the last number of eFishery employees?
The last number was 1,800. That's why I couldn't absorb all of them. But what I could help with for recommendations, transitions, and so on was just to friends from my networks.
What is your position among startup founders now?
It's mixed. So maybe there are some founders who, well, with the misinterpretation that my statement hasn't been clarified, it seems like I'm putting down all founders. So many of them are annoyed with me, like, why are you involving all founders if they did that when my intention wasn't that? But there are some who feel sorry for me. I mean, I meet founders. Instead of being annoyed, they start to upload about me saying they know I'm being wrong. They're like, be patient, trying to calm me down, stay strong. And there are some founders who are indeed closer. They support and help more closely. I mean, they become closer emotional support for talking and so on. But generally, it's mixed. Some have a negative view. If they contact me, they don't reply. My number is blocked. Some are like, let's meet. What can I help with? Some indeed try to sympathize with what I'm going through.
How many founders did you contact to recommend former eFishery employees?
Many, maybe around 20 companies that I contacted.
Was that to recommend manager head positions?
Between product and engineering, some field sales, and also manager head positions.
From your circle of startup founders, who is still the closest? Who did you talk to about eFishery employees and then give recommendations?
As for who, actually, many are different. There are several software house companies in Bandung, for example, looking in Bandung, so it's not because of personal closeness. The way is, I know them, they're good, and they can absorb. Many of them, because there are hundreds of employees, from the software house that I tried to recommend.
After all this, do you want to try starting a new business again? Has anyone from your founder circle offered you to join their business or start a new venture in the future?
For me, well, personally, since I no longer have a regular income since being suspended, right? So now the focus is, the important thing is to have an income. So whatever can be done for now, just do it first. But it's more just for daily living.
What are you busy with now?
My activities are still small scale. We sell the frozen business I mentioned, and my younger brother has a shrimp farm. So he has a shrimp farm, and I just give him information on what can be helped. So it's more just those small-scale things. I haven't thought about the future yet. More focused on just going through the process, then stepping back a bit to think about what I've learned recently, and that will be my provision for whatever I want to build later.
For example, if you get another job to lead a company or start a new business, what would you change from before?
What's certain is that I once built a company on a large scale, but no matter how big the scale, as I said, it disappeared quickly. So whatever I do later, I will ensure that the sustainability, the continuity of its impact, can be as long as possible, rather than being bigger quickly. Because what grows big quickly can disappear even faster than that. I want to learn from all of this, whatever I want to do later.